to the London Greener Week. We now have our next speaker, who is Matt. Matt will be presenting on overcoming the climate crisis with environmentally sustainable primary care. Matt has worked as a GP for over 17 years in northeast of England. Now he runs a environmental sustainability consultancy called SEE, Sustainability Working to Improve Human and Planetary Health. Matt, I will now hand over to you.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you very, very much. And it's a joy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm going to start by thinking about primary care. So I'll tell you a little bit about me in a moment, but my worry at the moment is that there's a lot of things going on in healthcare and a lot of things going on in primary care particularly. And I think that we've almost got this critical illness, this combination of things affecting staff numbers, staff morale, staff well-being, staff burnout. There's a patient demand, there's both a pent-up demand post-COVID, but I think that health is one of these which people are getting more chronic conditions. And there's a lot of problems at the moment with finance and particularly practice finance. And then I think we can add some things that are just coming on over the last few years. We've got these net zero targets, whatever that might mean. We've got the climate crisis, which is becoming more evident. And we've got a cost of living crisis, which means that people and patients and our staff are struggling with just being able to afford the basics of healthy food and transport and a roof and energy over our heads. This sounds a little bit doom and gloom, really. And those of you who know me know that I am not a doom and gloom person. So the question I've really got is, well, is there a cure to all of those things? And I absolutely think that the answer is yes. I think that we can solve all of these things, the practice finances, the morale of staff, the number of staff that there are, patient demand, and the net zero climate crisis and cost of living crisis, all at the same time. And I think that we can really do this through practicing and delivering environmentally sustainable primary care. I think that this is going to be better for the practice finances, better for the practice staff, better for the patients, the populations that we look after in the communities in which we work and we live, and less impactful, less harmful from the planet as well. But I didn't always think like this. This is my environmental motivation curve. This is what's happened to me over the last 50 years or so. So when I was a teenager, I was at college, at school, and I joined groups like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. And I think that I really thought that it would be quite heroic to be on one of the inflatables getting in between the whaling ships and the whales themselves. Never did any of that, but that was my sort of idea of heroic behaviour. So my motivation was quite high. And then I went to medical school, and I went to medical school in Southampton. And to get to Southampton, we needed to go past Newbury. And the Newbury bypass was proposed and being built. And this was a part of a road building scheme that was going to be adding a lot of extra traffic to the roads, was removing a lot of trees, a lot of special scientific interest land, a lot of ancient woodlands. And I went up and protested and took action. And this was really important because it showed me that there was strength in numbers. There was an advantage of lots of people doing something. But then I became a GP, and I kind of thought that environmental actions were not in keeping with being a good doctor, and I wanted to be a good doctor. So it was busy, it was intensive. For me, it was about getting the job right, doing the best that I could in my chosen profession. So I spent probably about 15 years not really being as motivated as I then became. There's a bit of a blip there, and this is really because my daughter was born, and that made me want to do something different. And I didn't want a life of regret and look back and think maybe I could have done something better or different. And that really helped me to see the bigger picture. And so my motivation grew. I went back to university. I did an environmental science degree and then a master's. And then really, really importantly, I found fellow people to talk to. This was one of the most important things. I hadn't realised how important it was to find my tribe, to find people that I could connect with, relate to, talk to about environmental issues in primary care. And that really has led me to where I am now, and the recognition that this is, for me, the most important thing that that there is, and that I will be spending the rest of my working life to answer the question: how can we provide high quality care for patients with least environmental impact? And that, I think, is more important for me than anything else. But really, looking back over the last 30, 40, 50 years, it shows me that everybody is at a different point in their lives in terms of their motivation or their desire to do something. And if you'd asked me 20 years ago what my desire was, you can see it wouldn't have been particularly high. And so it's okay for us to change our minds, to become, for our motivation to change with time, for us to find the things that are most important to us. So I now try and work across primary care. And for me, primary care is the most important part. And why? Well, it's because we do in primary care most of the patient contacts, whether it be general practice, whether it be community opticians, dentists or pharmacies. Collectively, we're not that far off 1 billion appointments a year. That means that we've got 1 billion opportunities to interact with our patients, with people in our communities, with carers, with families. And that, for me, is really where our superhero power lies in primary care. So what can we do? Well, first of all, we need to do a baseline. We need to work out where our emissions are, what our impact might be. We can then prioritise what we're going to do. What are we going to do first? What's going to be most important? What's going to make the biggest difference? And then we can actually take actions, and we can do it. We can do what we say we're going to do. We can build on the baseline and our priorities and do those things. And for me, it's the doing. It's not the saying, it's not the talking, it's doing the do. But actually in primary care, we do a lot more than that. We can motivate, we can enthuse, we can inspire, and we can enable our patients, our staff, and their families and carers to do things as well. And for me, that is really, really important. We can use our influence far wider than we think we've got. So from a baseline perspective, what is the carbon footprint or the environmental impact of primary care or of general practice? Well, there was a paper out a couple of years back when the Greener NHS was launched, and we can break it down so that we can see what the footprint of the whole of the NHS is, about 25 million tonnes. Primary care is about 20-25% of that. So the NHS cannot get to net zero. It cannot meet its overall goal if primary care is not included within those conversations. So for me, primary care is absolutely essential. It's a key part, it's a key player in what happens to the environmental impact of healthcare. And we've heard from some of the other speakers the real importance of prevention. And prevention actually is really good for our workload. If we can prevent people from becoming unwell, whether it be through active travel, whether it be through plant forward diets, for example, whether it be preventing conditions, diabetes, hypertension, which then lead on to other conditions such as heart disease and kidney disease. So prevention is going to be absolutely key. But this is where we are at the moment. So primary care, about 5.75 million tonnes of greenhouse gases are emitted each year from all of its activities. Just shy of half of that is from the medication which we prescribe, excluding inhalers. About 13% comes from the greenhouse gases that are within the inhalers themselves, so the metered dose inhalers. So it's very significant. And actually, from a non-clinical perspective, we've got three main parts. We've got energy, we've got travel, which incorporates staff and patient travel, and we've got goods and services. And each of these is responsible for roughly 13% each. So we've got 13% from the inhalers, approximately 13% is from energy use, to run our practices, the heating and the electricity. Roughly 13% of their overall emissions is from travel, and roughly 13% is from goods and services. Now, it does depend on individual practices, what type of building that they've got, what type of heating that they have, how far away they are from patients and staff, what services they provide as to what goods they might be buying for those. So if, for example, there's a contraception clinic or fitting coils, contraceptive coils, they'll use different things to if they do minor surgery for dermatology cases, for example. So it's not the same for everybody. It varies. But it starts to give us an idea of what our baseline is and where the priorities might lie. So if we're going to put a lot of energy into one segment that's worth 13%, well, we could put equal amount of energy and effort into the other areas that are responsible for 13% each. One of the things that's really important is understanding the baseline, which means understanding that there is a variation in how much emissions different things, in inverted commas, cost from a carbon footprint. And I'm not going to ask people to put any answers in the chat, but I just want you to have a think about this. There are 5 items here which are known to healthcare or to primary care, and there are 5 total footprints for each of them, but they're not in the right order. So I'm just going to give you about 20 seconds to have a think which one might go with which carbon footprint might go with which activity. So the activities is a single flu vaccine, a month's supply of omeprazole, a Ventolin Evahaler, a cataract operation in the UK, and a GP appointment. And the footprints are ranging from half a kilo up to about 180 kilos. And just as a point of reference, because people go, oh, I don't really know what a carbon footprint is. Each of us in the UK emit about 25 or 30 kilos of greenhouse gas emissions each day in our personal lives, from what we eat, how we travel, how we eat our homes, the goods that we buy, etc. So just as a reference, one of these is going to be roughly the amount of emissions from each of us in a day. I'm delighted that Minna's put Ventolin, the Evahaler, at 25 kilos. Had you got that wrong, Minna, I would have been surprised. But yeah, absolutely correct. So here are our 5 different actions, or our five of our different options, and we're going to have a think about which is the footprint for each of them. But it's not just the footprint from an individual activity, but it's how many of these we do each year. So this is the list. So we range from, at the bottom, about half a kilo of greenhouse gas emissions from a month's supply of omeprazole. So this is a medication, and all medications have got a different carbon footprint depending on how they're made and what they're made from, the processes that are involved. And there's a really good carbon footprint calculator for medicines, so that people can compare how impactful different UK tablets and capsules are. A flu vaccine, about 1.5 kilos, Ventolin inhaler, which we heard from Minna, about 25 kilos, and that is specifically from the gas propellant in a metered dose inhaler. GP appointments, there's a bit of variety depending on what is included or excluded from a GP appointment. These figures are from a Lancet paper a couple of years back, and include all of the prescribing that goes on, as well as all of the other factors. And the cataract operation in the UK is about 180 kilos. But it's important to recognise that how many of each of these we do. So a flu vaccine, for example, we do around 10 million or so a year. So the total emissions from that, about 15 million kilos of greenhouse gases. Now, we've heard a bit about prevention already. Preventing flu is far less impactful in terms of greenhouse gases than treating it. So people who end up in hospital or end up in ITU because of the flu have got a much larger carbon footprint than all of the people who we've given the flu vaccine too. So there are some things which actually, if I was in charge and could spend some greenhouse gases, things like flu vaccines, things like the cervical cancer vaccine, absolutely not a question. Preventing these things is far, far, far better than treating them. And we heard this already from things like the kidney disease, that stopping kidney disease from happening is far better environmentally, far better financially, far better for the patients and their family and their friends and their carers than waiting for them to develop something. But there's other things like the Ventolin inhaler, which generates a lot of emissions. And when people take a step back and they have a look and they say, is this good for patients? The answer is invariably no. There are much better ways of treating and managing asthma than over-reliance on short-acting beta agonists. Cataract operations are really interesting. So this is the UK figures. There's some cataract surgery that goes on in other parts of the world, which is about 1/20th, so less than 10 kilos of emissions for the same operation. So just because we've always done it this way does not mean that it is the best way for patients or financially or the planet. So we can do far, far, far better. So for general practice specifically, we know that if we can't measure something, waistlines, BMIs, weights, cholesterol levels, HbA1cs or something else, then we're not going to know what we could do to improve it. So having a baseline number gives us a starting point, and that can be absolutely crucial. So for UK GP practices, there is a carbon calculator which I've developed in conjunction with other people, which is free to use, and practices can put in their numbers and get their footprint. So it's not relying upon the UK average or a breakdown from national figures per practice. This is your footprint based on your details, your activity. Having said that, these are the average figures that, so I do carbon footprinting of practices, and this is the average. So this is not your practice and you can get your figures, but this is just using it as an example. This starts to give us an idea as to where our priorities might lie. So which is going to be the thing that's going to make the biggest difference? One of the things that we can see is that gas and electric have gone up in price quite a lot recently. Practice bills have jumped dramatically. So for some practices, this is where they want to start, because it's not just about reducing their carbon footprint, it's also about reducing their energy bills. For other places, they look at travel because there's some added benefits of changing the modes that people travel with, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But we'll start with the energy. So as I say, this is worth about a third of overall emissions. And once a practice knows this, they can then start writing down, well, what uses energy? What uses the gas and the electricity that we are paying for in our practice? Now, I'm from Yorkshire. I don't want to be spending money and giving money to energy companies unless there's actually either a patient benefit or a staff benefit of doing so. So actually, by writing everything down, it means that we can start to work out, well, which things use the most electricity. And that can be really, really helpful, because we can then start prioritizing what's going to make the biggest difference. So the first is that we can measure. So we've identified what uses gas or electricity. Practices can use things like a smart meter to measure their daily amount of electricity used. So this is over a Christmas period a few years back. And we can see that in the first week, Monday through Thursday, that the practice was using 900 or so kilowatt hours. And then on the Friday, it dropped to 560. On the Sunday, it was down to 360. Now, the practice was closed on Christmas Day. So what was using that electricity? Was there any benefit to the patients or to the staff of using not that far off twice what was being used on the Sunday? I would argue, no, there isn't. So suddenly we've got some data that we can put as a baseline and say, could we reduce our electricity use to what we're using on the Sunday, because we know that that's going to be about the minimum, so that the other days that we're not open, in this case Friday, Saturday and Monday, that we can reduce it. So one of the things that, or one of the mantras that is coming out from the NHS Energy and Estates is to make every kilowatt hour count. So again, I'm from Yorkshire. I don't want to be using electricity if I don't need to. So how can I reduce that demand? Well, this is how the NHS Net Zero Carbon Delivery Plan looks like, and we can start using this and translating it into primary care to be able to recognise and identify where our priorities lie. So we can start to see, this is NHS, this isn't your specific building, but we can start to see that things like carbon and energy management are far, 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 far more impactful in terms of emissions than small appliances. Or LED lighting is far more important than ventilation. So we can start to think, well, what does that mean for me, for my practice? How can I use this to make a difference? Things like investing in building fabric. Insulating the buildings can be really, really important, and there's a whole host of information available to try and help practices make the most of that. Some of this is about working towards electricity-led heating. So when the gas boiler goes pop, of course it'll be 20th of December because that's sod's law. How can we replace that with an air source heat pump, for example, something that is electricity led? So we know that electricity is increasingly being generated by wind and solar in the UK. How can we make use of these low carbon electricities? Well, for an air source heat pump, it's not as straightforward as just switching it in for a gas boiler. There's some preparatory work that can be done in the weeks, months and years before the boiler needs replacing. So actually, if everything's in place because we've increased the fuse size in the fuse board, for example, so that we are prepared for a bigger piece of equipment that uses electricity, all of these things can be done in advance. There's an energy hierarchy triangle which can help direct our actions. So we start with energy saving. Can we turn stuff off? Can we make every kilowatt hour count? Can we change behaviour? So one practice, for example, instigated an electricity responsibility plan. The person who was in that room at the end of the day was responsible for the electricity used by that room overnight. Basically a way of saying switch everything off at the wall. So whether it be the examination couch, whether it be the computer, whether it be the printer, whether it be the ophthalmoscope, for example, these things are just being left in left plugged in and switched on, and they are not benefiting staff and they're not benefiting patients. There's some tech solutions. There's kill switches, so one switch turns everything off. There's light sensors, so whether it be movement, whether it be light levels, and then there's the change to LED bulbs. If you go from a GU10 halogen spotlight bulb at 70 watts to an LED GU10 spotlight bulb at 2.5 watts, you will have a return on investment in about 4 days. That includes buying the bulb, and running it is about the same electricity as the halogen bulb would have used in 4 days. So return on investment can be phenomenally quick. So there's a whole host of co-benefits, and this could be really, really important, that you might not want to do these actions because of environmental reasons. You might say, actually, I'm going to do this for financial reasons. So the problem is the practice has got high energy bills. What's the action? Well, we're going to reduce those bills. And how are we going to reduce that? Well, we're going to look at reducing use. We're going to have normal is off. We're only going to turn the couch, the electric raising couch, examination couch, when we're using it. We're going to look at building fabric. Down at the bottom of the list is self-generation, solar panels on the buildings. And overall, this means that the practice benefits from lower bills, the planet benefits from less emissions. But what does that mean for practices? Well, this is a practice down in Gloucestershire. They use, they've got an energy rating of C, which is, that's okay, isn't it? It's not too bad. It's still green in colour. Use about 450 or so kilowatt hours per year. That's for the practice. But when we compare it to somewhere else, like there's a practice that was built in Coventry called Foals Hill Health Centre. This meets Passive House certification, which means that it is the most energy efficient around. Their bills, their energy use is 80% less. Now, I suspect if I could say to all of you, you can have an 80% permanent reduction in your energy bills, you'd say, yes, please, thank you very much. That sounds lovely. I'll have that one. Well, these are GP practices that are doing it. So what about staff travel and patient travel? This is reasonably large, about a third or so of the footprint of the emissions of general practice, but it's very dependent upon the where the practice is, where the staff are, and where the patients live. In London, you have got a somewhat better transport system than we have in rural North Yorkshire. I don't have a nearest tube station. I think probably my nearest tube station is Newcastle, which isn't particularly handy unless you live in Newcastle itself. I mentioned co-benefits of doing an action that can have more than one benefit when it comes to finance, that we can reduce financial bills and reduce emissions. Well, there's a concept called co-harms. And this is from how we travel, what could be an additional harm. So these 6 pie charts are a measure of time, and they compare different types of vehicles in different settings. So I'm going to make the assumption here that I live in rural part of the UK, and those who are on here from London are going to live in an urban congested area. Each of the charts represent the number of minutes of life lost from the surrounding community for 1 mile travelled. So if I drive an electric car around rural North Yorkshire, each mile travelled removes, because of air pollution, tyre pollution, how the electricity was generated, how the car was produced, it has a negative impact of about 14 seconds of life for each mile I drive. However, the bottom corner where it says diesel and urban congestion, this is 12 minutes of life lost for 1 mile travelled. So if I did a 5-mile round trip, drive to the supermarket and back, drop the kids at school, go to the GP practice, or whatever my 5-mile journey was, that is 1 hour of life taken away from the community for that one single journey. So I'm travelling one journey once, I'm taking an hour's life away from the community in which I live. And these, of course, are our friends, our neighbours, our family. So we actually did some work with the practice, and we added up all of the staff journeys by car over a year, and we could calculate the amount of carbon emissions, in this case about 46,000 kilos, but we could convert that into the number of days and years of life being lost through that travel. So this is one practice, their staff commute for 1 year. And we could do exactly the same for patients, and we could work out that for this practice to deliver primary care for 1 year, there was about 3.5 years, 8.5 years of life being lost, and about 70,000 kilos of greenhouse gas emissions or thereabouts. So actually, the way that we travel can be really, really important. One of the things that we can do, and we've heard from people in transport already, is we can ask people how they travel at the moment. We can ask our staff, we can ask our patients. But for me, that is not enough. We can ask people, how would you like to travel? Now imagine the day is sunny, the birds are singing, you have no other commitments. You don't have to drop the kids at school, you don't have to go and visit your mum, or you don't have to do the shopping or whatever. How would you like to be able to get to work? And that shows what people's motivation are. And then we can talk about, well, what would enable that mode of travel to happen? So, for example, we can do the baseline first of all. So this was a travel survey of about 400 or so staff in primary care in general practice, and we could see how far different people or what proportions of people travelled in different ways. And we could ask how they travel at the moment. So, for example, those who had less than a 1 mile return journey, 40% of them drove by car. So this is, and I appreciate that for those of you who are from London, this is absolutely crackers. Why on earth would you drive less than a mile there and back in a car? We could do the same. So for increasing journey length, so for this is people who are up to a 5 mile round trip, 80% of them, or just shy of, travelled in a car on their own. That's huge. I mean, 80%. So this is just normal. So we then ask the question, how would you like to travel? Perfect day? So even those who had up to a 10-mile round trip, when you said, how would you like to travel? The proportion in blue of those who would like to cycle, or those who would like to walk, or those who would like to walk with other people, or those who would like to go on public transport, meant that collectively the number of people who wanted to be in a car on their own fell to less than 45%. So we now know what people would like to do. The next question is, how do we enable them to do that? So, but there are many, many benefits of active travel. So this is not just about carbon emission reduction, but it's about your personal health, your physical health, your patient's physical health, your mental health, the healthcare costs associated with being active or inactive. It's about staff efficiency at work. Active staff, when we compare the efficiency of active staff with inactive staff, you get 1 extra week per year of productivity through activity. So encouraging activity in staff will give you an extra week's worth of productivity. So when we start thinking about, staff demand, staff morale, staff well-being, staff feeling that they haven't got enough time to do things, if we could improve productivity by a week a year for active staff, that is huge. We've got less expenditure on fuel. We've got better air quality. We've got a whole host of things that can be really, really, really important. And patients are no different. This is from Hull and Humber. So this is, they've got a people's panel there that is about 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people, I think, for this. And they asked, how do you currently travel to your practice? 45% said that they drove. A quarter of those who drove, when asked, how would you like to get there, said, I want to do something else. So a quarter of the patients who drive don't want to be driving. And that's before we've even made any changes to the infrastructure, to the roads, to the cycle network, etc. Now, there's a whole host of actions that practices can do. I think that this recording is going to be available, so please pause at this point, have a look, think about what you might want to do in your practice, for your staff, for your patients, to improve the activity levels. One of the things is, I was doing some work with a practice, and they had the practice manager said, we've got a real problem with car parking. We get a lot of complaints. A lot of patients are complaining because they just can't park. So how can I solve the car park problem? Well, actually, we started thinking about lift sharing. And there's a number of organisations, ModeShift and others, who've been mentioned already in presentations, can do these sorts of things, but practices can do it as well. So we started by working out where the staff lived. We saw the staff that lived near each other, and we said, well, what do you think about sharing? And they said, we would love to. We enjoy seeing each other in work, but we always feel guilty because we want to gossip with each other. We want to chat to each other, but we can't because we're at work. And so we're pushing the boundaries of our coffee breaks or lunch breaks to catch up with each other's lives. So we would love to. But we can't because our shifts don't coincide. So the healthcare assistant and the assistant manager and the pharmacist didn't work at the same time. And so the practice manager said, well, if we changed that, would that enable you to do to lift share? And they said, well, yes. So they made changes to the rota. Now, I know that they were only doing this because they were trying to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and improve air quality. The practice manager was actually very, very pleased that they had less car parking problems. But the staff really, really, really felt so much better as a result. Their morale, the staff morale went up, the team camaraderie went up because they suddenly had an extra 20 minutes each way, each day to gossip and catch up on each other's lives. They had more time together with each other. And because only one of them was putting fuel in the car for each of the journey, so that 3 of the cars out of the 4 were off the road, the cost of living crisis, those fuel bills went down. So suddenly we took an environmentally sustainable action, but got a whole host of other benefits as a result. So what's the impact? Well, going back to this practice, we did this cumulative emissions and health impact. So this was 2020, redid it 2023, so last year, and suddenly it had halved. So this is the amount of journeys effectively made in petrol and diesel cars had gone down. So practices can make a real impact. So this is not just looking at what's benefiting the staff, but this is about what's benefiting the community as well. I know that time is going to be short, so I'm going to skip through this bit a little bit faster. Just thinking about goods and services, about another third or so. Again, write down what you buy, what gets used, what doesn't get used. All of the medical consumables. Of course, it depends on the practices. This is me doing a waste audit, which means going through bags, working out whether the right stuff has been thrown away. Always ask permission, because otherwise it looks like you're a stalker. Don't worry, I had permission for this one. Ask the questions. What gets used? What doesn't get used? What gets put straight in the bin? What packs, for example, get opened up? Well, I don't need this piece of kit or equipment, and just put it straight into the waste stream. What could be reduced? What could be reused? And we can start to put all of these things together so that we can end up with a green action plan for a practice. So this is not about just doing one action. This is about doing lots and lots of different actions and involving different people as a result. One of the really important things, though, is about finding the barriers, but more importantly, finding the enablers. So this is not about a black and white binary 1-0 decision. This is about shades of grey or shades of green. So we don't have to do something 100% of the time for it to be valuable and worthwhile. So the lift sharing. If you only lift shared 4 days a week because the 5th day you had to pick up the kids from school, go to the shops or whatever, and that day you are going to drive your car separately, that's okay. You've done it 4 times a week, not 5. If you said, I'm going to eat meat only on a Sunday, but the rest of the week I'm going to have a plant-based, a farm-based, a garden-based menu, that's absolutely fine. You're doing it most of the time. So don't beat yourself up if you think, but I can't agree to do this 100% of the time. Think about doing it more of the time than you are at the moment. It's that progression, and it's knowing that we can do it in lots of different spheres. Catherine Hayhoe has got some absolutely fantastic TED Talks about the actions that we can do. And there's really 6 that we can think about, and we can break them down in a number of different ways, but think about doing some or more of these. So starting that conversation, talk to other people, tell them about your story, tell them about why it's important to you. We've heard elsewhere about consider where you keep your money. Your banking has got a very large impact, or can have, on your emission footprint. So there's places like Bank Green or My Mother Tree, which are very good, and they will give you figures on which banks are good and which banks are bad. When you talk to others, you can join your tribe. You spark ideas and you join action groups or greener practice, and you can actually start changes with other people as well. One of the things that's really important this year is keeping those politicians held to account. So write to them, talk to them, tell them why is it important that we have better cycle routes, that we have more opportunities to enable walking or insulating practices, etc. We can look at our own personal footprints, but tell other people that you're doing them. So if you're walking to work, or you're travelling by bus, or you've got a great uh, plant or garden-based meal, talk to other people, share it with them. Use your voice, but most importantly, do something. And just finally, I'm about to stop. This is from America, but I think that we can probably make use of it in the UK. So this is who do you trust for your sources on the climate change, on global warming? We've got Liberal Democrats, so sort of Biden and his party. We've got Conservative Republicans, so Trump supporters. And there we are. Second on the list for Trump supporters are primary care doctors as a trusted source of information. So if we collectively in primary care can even influence the Conservative Republican supporters, just imagine what we can do in this country. Use your influence, talk to people and share it. And that's it from me. I'm going to stop there. And if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. You can probably tell I can talk for England on this. Or Northern
Thank
Ireland,
you
Scotland
so
and Wales.
much. Thank you so much, Matt. That was a very well put together presentation. Lots of fascinating information, lots of, highlighting co-benefits and key information on sustainable practices is great. And, I'm sure you've got a lot of people's attention here, and you sparked a lot of key things. Okay, well, let's go with Helen. Helen, would you like to come in with your question?
Thank you. Yeah, hi Matt. That was great. Really interesting. I have a question around the inhalers, having two asthmatic adult children. There must be competing priorities about this, but prescriptions, when they're only allowed to be issued for 1 month, when they know it's a chronic condition, they know they're having their annual asthma check, and they know they're going to need them every month. That will have an impact on the carbon footprint, won't it? But I can understand why practices do restrict only giving a month's supply, etc. But there's some competing issues there, isn't there? So I was just interested in your thoughts on that.
When you say that the carbon footprint will increase from a monthly prescription, do you mean because of the travel to the pharmacy to pick it up?
Yeah, or to have it delivered, yeah.
Yeah.
They've got to go and get it, or it gets delivered to them. So that all increases carbon footprint, doesn't it?
It does. So, but it's partly about knowing what the most impactful part of the whole thing is. So poor asthma control is worst from a carbon footprint perspective, because people end up in hospital, they end up on steroids, they end up with a lot of admissions. So anything we can do to improve outcomes for asthmatic patients, reduce disease burden, absolutely is the best. The next best then is, well, what works best for that patient? What's their inhaler technique like? I don't know if you do respiratory care, but some of the stories that and patients that you see are absolutely shocking. I suspect we've all got the anecdotes of the patient who's allergic to cats, so that they squirt the inhaler at the cat because that's the problem. They don't take the inhaler themselves. It's horrendous. When it comes to the carbon footprint, so it's about 25 kilos or so of emissions in a single Ventolin inhaler. The travel to a pharmacy, even if that's 5 miles, the carbon footprint would be a couple of 100 grams. So if you, depending on the vehicle that you drive in, so that it's a very small proportion of the overall carbon footprint of treating that. Quite agree that there are other problems with monthly prescriptions. I suspect that Minna and others from a pharmacy perspective may well talk about this offline. And yeah, it's some of the rules.
I suppose we're multiplying that by thousands of people on inhalers, millions probably in the UK, and the amount of pollution it's putting in the air, sending them to get their inhalers. So yeah, it's just an interesting thought, isn't it?
The other is that most journeys to pharmacy coincide with a journey to somewhere else. So a lot of people don't go out just to go to the pharmacy, but they might go to the pharmacy and to the bank and to the supermarket and to, a number of places. The carbon footprint of a delivery is about between 60 and 100 grams. So, i.e., a very small proportion of what the whole footprint of the device would be. So if you were just driving to pick it up, delivery is better because the people who deliver tend to do multiple drop-offs at the same time in one journey. But it gets more complicated. But yeah, so if you were only leaving the home just to go to the pharmacy, just to collect some medication, you're right that that is not a particularly efficient way of doing it. But most people, they combine it with another journey, so it works out less impactful.
Thank you.
I can see, sorry, Mina, I didn't see yours, but I could see you popped a question at the top.
Yeah, I can ask that. And so
you.
I was at a pharmacy conference last weekend. 2 pharma companies have said to me, you know, don't bother switching to dry powder inhalers because we're producing carbon negative propellants coming up in 2028, 2030, don't know when. We don't currently have the data to appraise that, whether it's carbon offsetting or whether what they're doing. What are you advising primary care clinicians to do currently? Sit and do nothing, or still do your switches until that come out, appraise the data?
I quite agree with the question and with Rebecca Waters' comment afterwards. Currently, the only carbon neutral inhalers are because they're being offset, and I've got quite a lot to say about that, but I won't go into that right now. For me, it's what's best for the patient. For most patients, if given the choice, they do far better with the dry powder inhalers than the meter dose inhalers. They do far better on things like the MART regime. They become less dependent on SABA, the short-acting beta agonists. For me, if we can get people who, with better outcomes for them, less disease burden because they are better controlled, that they manage the dry powder better, I think we make that switch now. We get much better patient benefits and planetary benefits simultaneously today in 2023, not waiting for some magical unicorn at the end of the decade, which may or may not appear. And even if, let's just magically pretend that these are genuinely carbon negative or carbon neutral inhalers with a propellant, we still have poor asthma care. Changing the propellant isn't going to change the outcomes for patients. We have got a terrible record in the UK for asthma care and asthma admissions. Greener Practice have got a great high quality, low carbon asthma toolkit that all practices can use. And this is very much, how do we get better care for patients? How do we get better or less impact on the planet at the same time? Genuinely, I think we can do this simultaneously. This is not about one or the other. Better for patients, better for planet. Can I just answer a couple of the other questions? I think Laura had a question.
Yeah.
Do I have a reference for the days of life lost figures for driving different vehicle types? Yes, absolutely. Mike Berners-Lee's book, There's No Planet B. In my version, it's page 109. Yes, it is bookmarked. Yes, I do use that quite a lot. That's where I would go for it. It's Mike Berners-Lee's a great guy, well worth reading. His other book, How Bad Are Bananas, if you're interested in the carbon footprint of a banana and everything else, great to have on a reading list. Josephine Frame put, nurses were voted the most trusted professional according to YouGov. Absolutely. If I had a nurse or a doctor telling me that this was the case, I would believe both of them. But you're right that nurses are just above doctors. But either way, if we can change the mind of Trump supporters, just imagine the opportunities in the UK. Marianne Taverner, which bit of prescribing is the most environmentally challenging element? Do you mean environmentally challenging from a planetary perspective or a patient behaviour perspective? I think that some of it is, for me, you start with what's best for the patients, what is the least environmentally impactful way that we can achieve that. So if I had 2 choices, one was less bad than the other, I'd go for the less bad one if patient outcomes were the same. Oh, planetary, yes. So Minna, have you got, is there a presentation on antimicrobial resistance at some point? No. Okay, so antibiotics is basically particularly impactful. So there's a Lancet paper. So if you go onto the MCF classifier, which I suspect might get put in the chat in a moment, that they have basically got what is the carbon impact of all of these different things that can be prescribed out of the BNF. There's a paper linked on that website, which is a preprint for a Lancet paper, which basically says antibiotics are very impactful from a carbon perspective. So it's about appropriate prescribing. It's not about deprescribing. It's not about stopping in all cases. It's about what's most appropriate. So it's things like, does this person need antibiotics for a viral cough, for an earache, for a non-bacterial sore throat, for example? It's about appropriateness. But there's also a whole host of other negative effects of antibiotic prescribing, which are not just carbon, but I think that yeah, so environmental pollution and all sorts of other things as well. So if it was me, I would probably start and think, how could we make antibiotic prescribing more appropriate? Do we need near patient testing for inflammatory markers, for example, so that actually we get the right treatment for the right patient?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Matt. That was a very good, comprehensive responses back as well as your presentation. It was a really good one put together. Like I mentioned before, the recording will be uploaded onto the London Future Greener NHS page. I will share the links, that way everyone can go back and watch the recordings. And if you do need Matt's details, I'm sure Matt will just pop his email address in the chat, because I can see there's a lot of people that are that would like to approach you, Matt. So thank you again for presenting and taking your time out. We now have we have a next speaker that will be starting at 1 o'clock. So if anyone needs to take a quick break, you can, but please join the call back at 1 o'clock for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
both.
Matt.
I've got a meeting on primary care estates, so I'm going to have to disappear off, but I hope to join you again later on in the week. But if there's anything else I can do, you know that I'll talk about this until I draw my last breath.
Lovely. Thanks, Matt.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Matt. Thank you so
Off for
much.
now.
Take care.
Hi, Emma.
Hi, Emma.
Hi. How are you?
Good.
Oh, can you hear me?
I think there's a lag.
I thought that was me.
Are you at
There we
home?
go.
Oh.
Uh,